Let's look now at our weekly feature, where we look at the stories dominating headlines over the past 7 days. Both the Madlanga Commission and the Ad Hoc Committee have heard explosive claims into alleged infiltration in the criminal justice system. Let's now speak to senior political reporter Ndaedzo Nethonzhe, University of Johannesburg Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership's Dr. Oscar van Heerden, as well as governance and political analyst Hlumelo Xaba. Gentlemen, a pleasure to have you all with us. Remember, to you, as our viewers, you can also send us comments and questions on WhatsApp to 072-110-5584 or call us on 010, or rather 010-594-6010. Engage with us on X at Newzroom 405. We continue now with our guests, and Ndaedzo, I'll start with you. When you observe the proceedings, especially at the Madlanga Commission, from a reporter's vantage point, what stood out for you, especially when we hear, for instance, about senior officials in Ekurhuleni allegedly protecting this Julius Mkhwanazi?
That was explosive testimony from those that were speaking at the Madlanga Commission, especially where witness D was concerned, because he was central in covering up a murder. That's according to his version. Of course, that has still to be proven in a court of law, but according to the testimony that he gave, and it was very short, by the way, he alleges that, Julius Mkhwanazi had that much power in the city of Ekurhuleni, where they would be able to raid certain premises, commit crimes, not just to steal property or money for that matter, but also a murder and a cover-up of that murder. And I think that was the main jaw-dropping evidence. When Lieutenant General Ndaedzo Nethonzhe made those allegations on the 6th of July, one would not have expected that we would be hearing of senior police officials covering up murders and disposing of bodies, which is something that came out this week. And I think the Madlanga Commission will be hearing more of such testimonies going forward, because if you look at the terms of reference of the Commission, they not only cover just SAPS, they have to go also into the metros, Ekurhuleni, city of Tshwane, as well as Joburg. So we're still going through quite a lot, and I think the Mkhwanazi bit, the Julius Mkhwanazi bit that came out this week was shocking, even for me as a journalist, to hear of such a cover-up.
Dr. Van Heerden, up until now, a lot of the testimony we've been hearing is about this alleged infiltration within the SAPS. But now we look at the rot at municipal level, specifically speaking to issues at Ekurhuleni right now. Let's speak to that a bit more. How does the Mkhwanazi saga, especially from a rogue EMPD perspective, what does it show us about this alleged political shielding? Does it reflect deeper governance and accountability failures within the municipality?
No, absolutely, it does. I don't think, I think we must be very clear. I don't think that General Mkhwanazi understood and realized exactly what the can of worms is that is opening. I think at the beginning there was a frustration, perhaps, with the Minister Mkhunu for shutting down the political killings task team. That was, according to Mkhwanazi, was doing some good work within the province and elsewhere. But I think by stepping forward and talking of general corruption, drug cartels, criminal elements within the law enforcement, particularly in South African Police Service, and now moving towards municipal level, I think we are going to be in for a serious ride. We are going to hear, I agree with the previous analyst, we are going to still hear more and more revelations and the rot that's there, not only in the Ekurhuleni metro, but also elsewhere. And I think that this was the real task of the Madlanga Commission. I think this is what President Ramaphosa had in mind, not only to try and get to the bottom of what happened and why the minister his minister took decisions, but also how deep does the rot actually go?
Hlumelo, let's bring you in. This debacle or controversy around blue lights once again came under the spotlight this week. So with the commission revealing, for instance, a fake MOU which enabled this alleged organized crime figure to use blue lights, what does this suggest then about the vulnerability, especially of municipal structures, to criminal networks?
Well, I actually must start by echoing what Dr. Van Heerden just articulated now, that General Mkhwanazi did not actually know that he was opening a can of worms on the 6th of July when he divulged the information that he did to the public. And I think that what really stood out for me was Mr. Ngqiza's testimony at the Madlanga Commission, which is what you alluded to now in regards to the registration of blue lights, because he even spoke about the disposal of assets of cars that were registered of Ket Matlala's cars that were registered within that municipality in terms of how regulations weren't followed in the registration of fleet, because each and every department in a municipality in Nhlanhla has a fleet management unit which is supposed to ensure how those assets get acquired and how they get exposed. And apparently the manner in how, according to Mr. Ngqiza, the manner in how those assets were disposed by the municipality, which was, by the way, headed by Julius Mkhwanazi, or rather facilitated by Julius Mkhwanazi, were done in a manner that suggests that there's a lot of maladministration within EMPD. I just believe that this exposes the depth of the decay within that municipality, because a lot of things that have been brought to the forth or divulged to us as the public now are things that actually point out to Ekurhuleni municipality, the installation of blue lights, which, by the way, according to previous witnesses at the commission, confirmed that that by law is not allowed. So that alone, I believe, that shows the rot, or the depth of the rot at Ekurhuleni municipality. And I think that he even said something along the lines of General Julius Mkhwanazi alluding to the fact that you think this is a municipality, which goes to show that there are some factions of some sort, not only at the top where we see at SAPS, but even at a lower level, at a micro level,
Right.
within some of the metro police.
Ndaedzo, let's turn our attention to Parliament now. Cedric Gabinde's testimony was rejected for contradictions and thumbsucked information. How significant was this moment in the broader inquiry?
Yeah, the chief of staff of the now suspended police minister, Senzo Nkabinde, appeared before the ad hoc committee in Parliament. Of course, he does make the allegation that because his gadgets were confiscated by SAPS during that raid a couple of weeks ago, he would not have exact information when he presents his testimony before, or his evidence rather, before the ad hoc committee. But he was failing on just the basics, simple things such as dates, when he was contacted by who. And we're not talking about information that happened a long time ago. We are talking about information that came in when Senzo Mkhunu was appointed as police minister. And it doesn't take a person with half a brain to understand when that happened. So anything that is being spoken about in as far as the Mkhunu and Nkabinde relationship is everything that happened after May 2024, where he was appointed as police minister. So to not be able to give information about it, and I think it was the right decision by the chairperson of that ad hoc committee, Soviet Lekhanyane, and committee members in sending him packing, because we do need credible information. I do, however, feel that it may just have worked in Nkabinde's favor, because when it does appear at the Madlanga Commission, which appears to carry more weight, he may be better prepared than what he was when he appeared at the ad hoc committee this past week.
Dr. Van Heerden, when you track the reactions, especially on Twitter, some describe Ngabinde's evidence or testimony as embarrassing or even shameful. But what does Ngabinde's contradictory evidence then reveal about government culture when dealing with allegations, especially of organized crime infiltration?
In fact, just before we continue with this one, I wanted to just add one other issue with
Sure.
the previous point, and that is that it's quite clear to me that where corruption in the main comes into play with the South African Police Service is because they are contracting private contractors. It's when they, like with the CAT situation, bringing in private security that can infiltrate. We know, for example, that the fingerprint system of the South African Police Service is in private hands, constantly be manipulating the South African Police Service and demanding more money and so on and so forth. So I think the South African Police Service must become an independent, self-sustaining entity that does their own work and doesn't need to contract private workers in. So that's that. On the Nkabinde thing, I mean, I think we must not skirt the issue here in Nhlanhla. Mr. Nkabinde is an uncooperative witness. He's ducking, he's diving, he's shady, he's slippery, he seems to want to pretend he doesn't recall dates and so on. This is classic. This is a classic example of someone who does not want to be truthful, who is trying to think on his feet, trying to be creative with the truth, economical with the truth, as they say. So I think that I agree with the previous input that the chairperson was correct to say, no, hold on. Let's call this off. You are clearly not cooperating. It seems you don't understand the gravity of where you are. And you are taking committee members for a ride. So maybe you must go and rethink whether you want to continue on this line of argument where you can't recall, where you duck, you dive, and so on. But I think what is important, and this is really an important issue, they mustn't assume that people who come to the commission, or to the ad hoc committee for that matter, are going to be cooperative. You know, people need to have the skill. And there's one or two of them there, but you must have the skill to ask the right questions, to be able to extract what you want, even from uncooperative witnesses such as Mr. Nkabinde. So I think there is some fault on the part of the ad hoc committee as well, and they need to sharpen up their questioning and their interrogation methods and so forth.
Hlumelo, while Nkabinde has been sent home packing to literally find his moral compass, MPs across party lines then expressed concern, especially about these inconsistencies in the testimony received. Does this unity then signal a shared alarm, especially about criminal influence within the state?
Well, Nhlanhla, one thing that I always say is that these proceedings, both the ad hoc committee as well as the Madlanga Commission, are going to be used by political parties as an agency, or even those that are implicated, one, as an agency to exonerate themselves, and secondly, as an agency to also settle certain political scores. I'm saying this because we've seen in the past how certain individuals always sometimes divert from the questions or the point that is being argued in the ad hoc committee by asking questions that are not relevant but directed to certain individuals. For instance, we saw with Advocate Batoyi's testimony, whereby MK MP asked about why President Ramaphosa is not yet charged. So it's actually that I mean that some people are going to use these proceedings to actually fight certain political, as an arena rather, to fight certain political battles. But coming back to Cedric Ngabinde's answering, I think that he would have firstly had put a disclaimer that he did not have his gadgets. Firstly, I think that should have been common decency to actually state that there are certain things which I may not be privy to as a result of me not having my gadgets. And I think that also, in regards to some of the MPs, there are some divisions in regards to the manner in how they ask certain questions, or in the manner in how they try to protect certain individuals, in how they question each other. So I think that it's sort of a power dynamic of some sort that we see that ad hoc committee inquiry, where we are going to see people trying to shield certain actors who may have been implicated within some of the testimonies that have been divulged to us. For instance, like I mentioned now, we did see some testimonies implicating former President Jacob Zuma. However, we see MK party members countering some of those testimonies. So I think we are still going to see more of that unfolding at the ad hoc committee inquiry, because unlike the Madlanga Commission, this is an arena whereby politicians are now doing the questioning and also doing the investigation, meaning that there are always going to be certain political interests that are going to be either shielded or certain political interests that are going to be brought to the public for certain attention.
Gentlemen, let's take 5 and we'll continue this discussion in a short while. Of course, unpacking some of the leading stories this week, also reflecting on hearings at the Madlanga Commission as well as the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee. We return in a short while to discuss this even further. Welcome back. We continue unpacking some of this week's leading stories. Speaking to senior political reporter Ndaedzo Nethonzhe, University of Johannesburg Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership's Dr. Oscar Heerden, as well as a governance and political analyst, Hlumelo Xaba. Gentlemen, good to have you back. Ndaedzo, I'll continue with you. So we also found out about this decision to hear alleged organized crime figure Kat Matlala's testimony besides, or rather inside prison walls. It seems a bit unusual. Tell us a bit more about this. What does this say about the seriousness of this investigation?
Yeah, it is unusual to have such an arrangement, but it needs to happen. Mainly because Kat Matlala appears to be a central figure in this infiltration or alleged infiltration of criminal syndicates into the criminal justice system. This week we did hear, as we spoke earlier before the break, about how he allegedly had infiltrated the city of Ekurhuleni. We've heard about how he's had a relationship or an alleged relationship with senior members of the South African Police Service. So it would not make sense not to have his version of events in any form and just have the one side, because he does appear to be a central figure. There were recordings that were presented by an anonymous witness, that was witness A and witness B at the Madlanga Commission, where there are recordings of him being interrogated and making certain statements about him, saying he would want to sing for, and there were WhatsApp messages as well that were presented at the Madlanga Commission, allegedly of him, speaking, saying that he wants to keep this as evidence should things go south. So when you hear the ad hoc committee making these kind of arrangements to have Kat Matlala, although he himself, he reportedly has his reservations in as far as how he needs to present this, his version of events, it is extremely important. I think, if anything, that would be one of the most important testimonies after that of General Mkhwanazi, because it gives you a side that is, for a lack of a better word, the opposite of what the side of General Mkhwanazi. Now you start hearing the so-called Big Five or criminal syndicate side, where Kat Matlala appears to be the central figure. And there's been a lot of reporting about him from all circles. And if indeed the ad hoc committee has secured that arrangement to have him testify later this month, next week, then it would be a good thing. In fact, I also feel like the ad hoc committee is moving quickly, and I think that's because of the time that it has been allocated to investigate this matter, although the Madlanga Commission appears to be more, to have more meat when it comes to how it leads questions and gets answers from those that are witnesses. But to have Kat Matlala appear before the ad hoc committee is a major, major, major step. Like I'm saying, I think that would be the second biggest, most important thing after General Mkhwanazi's testimony.
And taking from Ndaetso's words, Dr. Van Heerden, this is a major step, traveling from Cape Town to all the way to Pretoria to hear an inmate's version of events. But interesting for me, Shamila Batoy's own comments, and with the NPA head admitting that South Africa is not winning the fight against organized crime. What systematic issues does that then highlight for you?
Yeah, on the CAT thing, I mean, CAT clearly sees this as a two-way thing. It's 2 points that he can score. On the one hand, it's getting his story out, and on the other hand, also dispelling potentially some of the allegations and the accusations and so forth that have been leveled against him and so on. So it's a win-win for him, at least. I just hope, as I said before, that it's all good and well to travel to Pretoria. Let's hope that people will have the right questions and ask the right inquiries in terms of making meaningful the testimony from him. On the Batoy situation, I mean, I think it's indicative of a prosecutorial system that is seriously deficient. I think what we are getting from Hlumelo Batoy is the fact that she has been at the head of an organization that is simply not able to step up for a variety of reasons. There's skill sets, the caliber of prosecutors that we have. We know, for example, that a number of very skilled prosecutors left the NPA. I think something that no one wants to talk about is the fact that lots of prosecutors that come into the NPA are not necessarily the best of the best. The NPA is seen as a last resort in terms of a job, and so you don't get the best. And I think on top of that, what we get from Batoy is the infiltration that's also there, which makes perfect sense. It's not, South Africa is not immune. We must stop thinking that we are special. The truth of the matter is that organized crime is such that you begin to groom young people, youngsters, men and women, to infiltrate your very enemy, what you perceive as the enemy. And the enemy with organized crime is South African police service, it's the judiciary, and it goes all the way up to judges. Judges are not immune to this. Money talks, as the saying goes. So I think that's what the commission and the ad hoc committee needs to get to grips with. Batoy is merely giving us symptoms, but we need to go to the root cause, and that is that we are simply not producing the qualitative prosecutors that we require in order to do the big cases. People always say, we're not seeing orange overalls, we're not seeing the big politicians and so on be going. It's because we see how cases are falling apart. Bushiri, with all high-profile bishop from Nigeria and so on, we can't even do the basics. And then you think you can come with a complicated case, such as criminality within the judicial system. We need to shape up.
Hlumelo, you heard Ndaedzo, comparatively speaking, saying that the Madlanga Commission seems to be giving us more analytical type of evidence or more meat to take from his words. But do you believe Parliament's investigation is connecting the dots effectively on the other end? Or is the state still struggling to grasp the full extent, especially, of these criminal networks that we are hearing about?
Well, firstly, I'll start off by saying that initially you remember that the Parliamentary ad hoc inquiry was sort of like fighting for a legitimacy, I would say, legitimacy against the Madlanga Commission. You remember that they perceived themselves, or rather they deemed that they were being perceived as a committee that is more junior than the Madlanga Commission, whereas that is not the case, because you must remember that these are just two arms of state that are exercising scrutiny over the same process, because you must remember that the Madlanga Commission is an executive order by President Cyril Ramaphosa, meaning that whatever recommendations and findings have been detected or rather taken from the Madlanga Commission are at President Ramaphosa's prerogative on whether or not to act on them, whereas this inquiry is one whereby after its recommendations and findings, it will then go to Parliament where it gets debated, or maybe even MPs can vote on certain matters. So I think that the legitimacy issue between the two is really a bit flawed, but they are both not, I wouldn't say on the same level, but they just have a role, they both have a huge role to play in regards to ensuring that we get to the crux of everything. However, I do believe that the Madlanga Commission, given that it is something we've seen a lot of commission of inquiries in South Africa, the Zondo Commission, as well as the TRC and even the Marikana Commission, and a lot of people didn't really have confidence in it. But I think fast forward to where we are now, we have actually seen a lot of gravitas that the Madlanga Commission holds, and as opposed to the ad hoc inquiry. In as much as the ad hoc inquiry is also important, that Parliament will get to actually decide on what happens, and also gives politicians as well as those who are within the National Assembly a chance to ventilate what their views and different perceptions are. So I think that going forward, it's just going to be important, for instance, for both of these bodies to exercise oversight and scrutiny very diligently, because you must remember also, like I mentioned earlier on, Ndlandla, that the difference with the ad hoc inquiry as well as the Madlanga Commission is that this inquiry is being the investigations are being done by politicians, meaning that there are some interests that are going to be covered, and there are also some interests that will be protected by the politicians because some of their political parties' members are being implicated. You'll remember that there was President Jacob Zuma, like I mentioned, whose name was mentioned, as well as another DA MP who was also implicated. So we might see a slight push back from politicians in these proceedings because of the fact that some of their members are implicated in everything.
Ndaedzo, before we end this segment, I want to turn our attention to the story that played out at the OR Tambo International Airport, where we saw a number of more than 100 Palestinians who are apparently stranded there. How did newsrooms then interpret the confusion, especially surrounding the arrival of this 153 Palestinian travelers with incomplete documentation from what we heard?
Yeah, that was quite a bizarre story, for a lack of a better word. I mean, you have a plane landing at one of the busiest airports in Africa, and the passengers on that train are not exactly processed from where they come from, and it lands here. There are reports of the Israeli government being involved or allegedly being involved in this. If that is the case, Ndlandla, and to the viewers, then I personally think that it may just have been an own goal in the context that there's been reports of a genocide happening in South Africa and so on. Now, these are people that are coming from a Palestine which by the United Nations standards, by the Hague, the Criminal Court, it has been said that they are experiencing genocide. Now you have South Africa that says, look, these people may not have been properly processed, or we don't know the exact story, but we know that these people are coming from a war zone, and we will accept them. That in the context of what has been happening geopolitically, and as far as the US and the Israelis concerned, I think South Africa may just use that opportunity, mainly because this is also happening during a very important week where the same South Africa is hosting the G20 Leaders Summit, which kicks off this week. Now, the focus will obviously shift to South Africa, and how we handle it as the nation will be something that the international world or the global world will be trying to look at this situation. It does, however, if you look at the other side of the coin, raise concerns about how then would you allow people that may not have proper documentation to be inside a country at a time where we are going to have this summit. We don't know these people. We don't know whether they pose a security threat ahead of the summit. that is if you're going to look at the other side of the coin. But I think South Africa so far, the South African government, notwithstanding the challenges, has been able to sort of handle it in a diplomatic manner where they're not taking sides, but they are saying we will look into the situation. And I think in as much as we've seen the challenges happening within SAPS and the security apparatus, I think they would have the capability to actually process these people and understand what really truly happened. And that might be something that will come out in this week.
Gentlemen, let's take a short pause and continue this discussion in a short while. Keen to hear from our other panelists as well, Dr. Van Heerden as well as Hlumelo Xaba, to get their views on some of these developing stories. Do stay with us. Welcome back. We continue unpacking some of the stories leading the news timeline this week, speaking to senior political reporter Ndaedzo Nethonzhe, as well as University of Johannesburg Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership, Dr. Oscar van Heerden, and governance and political analyst Hlumelo Xaba. Dr. van Heerden, I'll continue with you, and just touching off the last story we picked up on, those stranded Palestinians at OR Tambo International Airport. I want to get your sense about the story. What diplomatic implications then arise, in your view, from claims that an unregistered organization exploited vulnerable Palestinian families during their transit through to South Africa?
Yeah, Nhlanhla, I think that we must not fall into the trap of concentrating on the small issues. Exit stamps, which organization organized it and who duped who. I think that is completely irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. I think what is important here is we all know, internationally, pundits, analysts, governments all over the world accept that Gaza and the Gaza Strip is an open-air prison. And the reason why people say that is because Palestinians in the Gaza Strip cannot have free movement in and out of the Gaza Strip. In fact, they are kept in there. This is what made October 7 so significant, that Hamas and other resistance movements were able to breach the border of the Gaza Strip, come into southern Israel, and do what they did on October 7, 2023. It's because they were able to break out of this prison. Now, the question here is, how did a group of Palestinians on 2 occasions come out of the Gaza Strip, get into a chartered flight, and fly to South Africa? I think this is the critical issue, that we know that the genocide that is happening there, perpetrated by the Israeli government under the leadership of the war criminal Netanyahu, is about wanting to rid the Gaza Strip of the local population, of the Palestinians. They want to do an ethnic cleansing, the mass destruction from the north all the way down to the south, forcing people to the Rafah exit point, because they want to ensure what? To make sure that you make life so unbearable that they want to break through the Rafah and go into Egypt and into Jordan, so that you rid the strip off, because Trump and Netanyahu and others have got grand plans for the Riviera of Gaza. That is the issue here. So South Africa is confronted with a situation where 153 Palestinians on a chartered flight arrives at OR Tambo International. They've been lied to in terms of the destination. They are not sure whether they are applying for asylum. They don't have the requisite documentations and so forth, because rules still apply. Whether you are Palestinian or Sudanese trying to run away from conflict and war and genocide, you still have rules at our border points, at our ports. And this is what the border management was doing. But I think the bigger issue here is a war crime is being committed by Israel yet again by exporting Palestinians and sending them all over the world, including to South Africa. And the world must say, what do we do about that?
Hlumelo, Dr. Van Heerden mentions border control. Do you think this incident will then lead to stricter border management protocols for South Africa, or will humanitarian considerations continue to guide these kind of decisions like what we saw this week?
Well, South Africa is already dealing with a crisis insofar as border management control is concerned, because we know that South Africa, for instance, in this SADC region, is the capital, or rather the economic hub of this region, where a lot of people from neighboring countries such as Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique, etc., come into South Africa either as asylum seekers or as refugees that are fleeing, or as people who are actually coming here for a better life and fleeing the economic disparities that are facing their countries. So this instance now is no different from those, because these are people who come, like President Ramaphosa said, that these are people who are coming from a war-torn terrain, whereby we know that they're trying, but the Netanyahu is trying by all means to actually strip them of their identity within that region. However, I think the issue here is that this is an uncoordinated travel arrangement that was made. Although I have to echo what Dr. Van Heerden said, that there's a much bigger picture here that we have to look at, that even though these people may have come here illegally and may have actually landed at OR Tambo Airport, which for me is actually something that also sparks a debate insofar as our national security is concerned, because you cannot come into another person's country without proper documentation, which is something that is very contentious in South Africa insofar as those who are always coming into our country illegally is concerned. So I think this is a cause for concern on our security as well as the strength of our border management controls. So I believe that the Department of Home Affairs under Dr. Hlumelo Xaba will have a lot of work to do insofar as looking at this is concerned.
Gentlemen, let me thank you all for your time. That's Ndaedzo Nethonzhe, Dr. Oscar van Heerden, as well as Hlumelo Xaba, helping us unpack a dramatic and revealing week in South African politics. This has been a wrap of the week. Do stay tuned for more news and analysis throughout the evening as we unpack the next hour of the show.